Off Pigeon Hill, on the Gulf shore of northeastern New Brunswick, the night of the 3rd of September 1932. Constable J.E. Aubie, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, 5 months into the existence of the force he was now serving in, aboard the motorboat Naguac, a small wooden craft stationed at Shippagan, one of 32 boats the RCMP had owned for exactly 155 days. That afternoon he had not been on the water at all. He had driven the police car up the shore to Sainte Marie, near Pigeon Hill, and looked out. About 7 miles off he had seen a schooner. He believed he knew which one. He drove back to Shippagan, arrived at 5, and left again at 6:30 in the Naguac. 6 miles out, a light showed. 2 short flashes, about half a mile away. He did not run toward it. He took the Naguac to leeward and waited. Both of those decisions were made in under a minute, by a man in an open boat, with no radio, no radar, and no instruction from anyone. The record of that night survives because Aubie wrote it down afterwards in his own report, and because the Commissioner reproduced it in the annual report to Parliament the following year. What the 2 flashes meant, and why a man would deliberately put himself downwind of them, were not things the RCMP had taught him. So where had he learned them? He had learned them at Shippagan. 2 flashes was a shore signal, a boat on the beach telling a schooner offshore that it was safe to come in. Going to leeward meant the wind carried the Naguac's engine noise away from the men he was watching, instead of toward them. Neither fact was in a manual. Both were in him, because he had grown up and worked on that stretch of Gulf shore, and because until 5 months earlier he had been a customs man, not a Mountie. That is the shape of the whole story. On the 1st of April, 1932, by Order in Council PC 857, the Customs and Excise Preventive Service of the Department of National Revenue was transferred to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. With the duties came the fleet, approximately 246 officers and men, and 32 patrol boats of different types. The RCMP called the result the Marine Section. The same season, the force absorbed the provincial police of 5 provinces. Popular RCMP timelines compress all of this to the 1st of April. The Commissioner's own report for the year is more careful. Manitoba and Nova Scotia, effective the 1st of April. New Brunswick the 30th. Prince Edward Island the 1st of May. Alberta, later still, with Saskatchewan having gone first in 1928. The preventive service date is the one nobody disputes. A force built on horses, dog teams, and grid roads acquired a coastline in a single administrative act. It did not acquire the knowledge of that coastline. It hired the men who already had it. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you have been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of Canadian patrol between 1900 and 1980. The vehicle, the posting, the territory knowledge that years in one place built in the officer who covered the same ground in 4 seasons, and the communities those officers served, in the full complexity of what that service meant in this era. Not Mountie mythology. The documented operational and human reality of patrol in a country whose geography required its officers to know their territory the way no centralized system has ever been asked to know it. What did years on one stretch of water give this captain that no chart, no order from Ottawa, and no dispatch has ever been designed to hold? And if you served in this era, or your family did, put it in the comments. If your father or grandfather crewed a patrol boat on this coast, which boat, which port, and what did he know about that water that never got written into an order? Next on this channel, the RCMP Air Section of 1937, 4 aircraft, and what a pilot at 2,000 feet could see that a captain on the water could not. Back on the road. But what exactly had the RCMP taken possession of on that 1st of April? 32 boats sounds like a fleet. Read the list and it becomes something else. The cruisers, the largest vessels, were Adversus at North Sydney, Alichas at Shediac, Baroff at Gaspé, Bayhound at Yarmouth, Fleur-de-Lys, Preventor and Margaret at Halifax, Ulna at Gaspé, Conestoga tied up at Halifax, and a boat carried on the books simply as number 4 at North Sydney. Below them, patrol boats. Chaleur at Charlottetown, Skatery at Cheticamp, Ellsworth at Barrington Passage, Madawaska at Rivière-du-Loup, Dispatcher and Imperator on the British Columbia coast. Below those, motorboats. Beebe at Jeteray, Behave at Ingramport, Guardian at Halifax, Stalwart at Little Brass Door, Tenacity at North Sydney, Vigil at Riverport, Bristle at St. John, Neguac at Shippagan, O27 at Letete, Fernand Rinfret at Quebec, Gananoque on the St. Lawrence. And at the bottom of the list, 2 entries that are not boats in any serious sense at all. Outboard motors. 1 at Grand Manan, 1 at Morrisburg. Every one of them is recorded with a port. That is the significant detail. These were not vessels dispatched to a coast. They were vessels that lived on it, in the same harbors as the fishing fleet, crewed by men from those harbors, tied to the same wharves. The RCMP inherited 32 boats. What it actually inherited was 32 local positions on a shoreline. How much shoreline were 32 boats expected to hold? In the 7-month season of 1932, the patrol vessels covered approximately 270,000 miles. Set that against the ground. The chief preventive officer used one stretch of Prince Edward Island to make the point in his own report. From North Point to East Point is about 110 miles of coast, and one of the slower patrol boats needed roughly 10 hours to run it in one direction. 10 hours to look at one side of one island, once, if nothing happened and the weather held. The weather did not hold. The report notes, without elaboration, that the daily patrol was carried on in fog, in sleet, and in heavy weather, and that some of the patrol boats were not too comfortable. That is a naval officer's understatement about open wooden boats in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in November. Here is what that arithmetic actually means, and anyone who has run a small boat on a long coast will recognize it immediately. The patrol could never be everywhere, so the only question that mattered was where to be. A captain who guessed spent 10 hours looking at empty water. A captain who knew which coves had a road behind them, which shore had a beach a loaded motorboat could take, which schooner names belonged to which trade, what the wind had been doing since morning, spent the same 10 hours in the right place. The boat was identical in both cases. So what was the institution doing about the difference? The man given the problem was Superintendent M.H. Vernon, appointed Chief Preventive Officer from the 1st of May, 1932. He was advised on marine matters by Engineer Commander C. Stephen, late Royal Navy, and in the Maritimes by Commander J.E.W. Oland of the Royal Canadian Navy. Assistant Commissioner Kristen Yungat commanded the Maritime Provinces District from Moncton. Vernon did 3 things that year, and each of them is a statement about knowledge. First, he raised the entry standard and told the men that they would have to obtain the marine qualifications proper to the rank or rating they held, and that failing to do so would mean reduction. Second, and this is the one that matters most, he changed the winter. The old preventive service practice had been to discharge most ratings when the boats laid up and put the captains on half pay until spring. Vernon kept nearly all of them on through the winter of 1932-33, for training, for relieving, and for overhauling the engines. Third, he moved the direction of patrol operations out of Ottawa and made Moncton the main point of communication, on the reasoning that Moncton was the logical center to issue patrol orders from. He also recorded, plainly, that the communications methods were causing difficulties he had not yet solved. Read those together and a decision emerges. Ottawa could not see the coast. Moncton could see slightly more of it. The crews could see all of it, and Vernon decided it was cheaper to keep them through a winter than to lose what they held. But there was already another way to see the coast, and it was in the air. The Royal Canadian Air Force flew roughly 1,500 hours on preventive patrol that season, at something near 80 miles an hour, about 120,000 miles of coastline observed from above. The chief preventive officer's description of what this did is precise. The same 110 miles of Prince Edward Island coast that took a slow patrol boat 10 hours to run in one direction, an aircraft could cover out and back in about 2. And it could drop a message giving the position of every rum schooner within 20 miles of that shoreline. His report records one working example. A patrol boat lying off St. Peter's Bay was watching one schooner when an aircraft signaled that another was off East Point with a small motorboat made fast astern, about 30 miles away. The patrol boat ran for it at full speed and arrived in time to see the motorboat heading for shore. It could not take the boat, but it forced the cargo overboard and picked some of it back up. Without the message from the air, the captain would have spent that night watching the wrong vessel. Note carefully what changed. The captain's decision, where to be, was still the whole game. But for the first time, part of the answer arrived from outside him. This is the first appearance of the force that eventually undoes the entire arrangement. It arrived in 1932, in a canister on a streamer, and it was welcome. What did the men on the water still hold that the aircraft could not photograph? They held the shore itself, and the shore was not neutral ground. Nova Scotia had ended its own prohibition in 1930. The United States would not repeal until December of 1933. In between sat the maritime fishery, in a slump that ran through the 20s and deep into the 30s, and a very large regional pool of exactly the skill the trade required. Schooner crews, who could handle a vessel and keep their business to themselves. Nova Scotia yards built rum runners. Nova Scotia crews sailed them. The money came back into Nova Scotia villages, so the men in the patrol boats were policing neighbors, and often relatives, in an economy where the illegal work was frequently the only work. The record shows what that produced in practice, and it is not what the mythology would predict. Alongside the seizures, the 1932 report lists the other half of the job. Preventive taking the crew off a foundering schooner off Beaver Light and landing them at Halifax. Baroff picking 2 exhausted fishermen out of a northeast gale off Whitehead and getting their boat in as well. Patrol boat number 4 spending a full day wrestling a leaking schooner from Victoria, Prince Edward Island, to Pictou on a hawser that parted 3 times. Boats carrying mail, a radio inspector, and shipwrecked men to and from St. Paul's Island. 19 rum runners were seized that season. The tow lines went out far more often than that, which raises the harder question: what was this force, taken whole, on this coast in these years? It was 2 things at once, and both are documented. Roughly 60 miles from the Halifax wharves where Preventive and Fleur-de-Lys lay, in the Sipeknikatik district of Mi'kma'ki, stood the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. It opened at the turn of the decade and closed in 1967, the only residential school in the Maritimes. More than 1,000 Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik children from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Quebec passed through it. Many were taken there under compulsion. Uniformed RCMP were part of the machinery that removed children from their families and retrieved children who escaped. In 1934, there was an inquiry into the flogging of 19 boys at the school. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission described the policy the school served as cultural genocide. Survivors and their descendants use the word genocide without qualification. That is the same force, in the same province, in the same decade, wearing the same badge as the men on the Naguac. This channel does not resolve that by choosing one fact. Constable Aubie's knowledge of a shore signal off Pigeon Hill was real and operational. The harm done to Mi'kmaq families by the institution he had joined was real and is still being carried. Both belong in the record of what the RCMP was on the Atlantic coast in 1932, and any account that keeps only one of them is not documentation. By the end of that first year, how much of the Marine section was even left? Less than the force had started with. By the date of the Commissioner's report, the Marine section had gone from approximately 246 officers and men to 200, and from 32 patrol boats to 28. Margaret and Conestoga were judged too expensive for the patrol work they returned and were kept out of commission. Margaret was sold and offers had come in for Conestoga. Fort Francis and O-28 were written off as unfit. Because Margaret and Conestoga were out, some of their crews were simply not re-engaged when the season opened. Men who had been preventive service employees the year before put ashore in the 3rd winter of the Depression. Then the reason for the whole apparatus went away. American repeal came on the 5th of December, 1933. Rum running did not stop at once. The trade persisted in a smaller way for years. But the volume that had justified 32 boats, 246 men, and 1,500 hours of Air Force flying collapsed within a season or 2 of the Marine section's creation. The force had been handed a coastline to solve one problem, had spent a year learning to hold it, and then watched the problem dissolve. What it had built in the meantime was 200 men who knew a shoreline in a way that could not be transferred, filed, or replaced. What happened to them? In 1939, the RCMP Marine and Air Section personnel were transferred to the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force. The Marine Section, 7 years old, ceased to exist as a police organization. Most of the fleet went with the men. After the war, a new RCMP marine arm was assembled, the Marine Division, built largely out of surplus naval vessels. In 1962, the reorganized Canadian Coast Guard took over search and rescue, and the RCMP's need for boats fell away with it. What the change gave the institution: better hulls, better engines, better radios, and eventually a national service that could put a proper rescue vessel anywhere on the coast far faster than Naguac ever reached anything. Aircraft that could see 110 miles of shoreline in 2 hours became aircraft that could see all of it. None of that is nostalgia-proof sentiment. It saved lives that the 1932 fleet would have lost. What it did not give the coast: a way to hold what Constable Aubie held on the 3rd of September, 1932. That 2 flashes off Pigeon Hill meant a landing and not a fisherman. That the wind that night was carrying his engine noise and which side of it to be on. The new system got there. It did not know the thing the old crewman knew. Nobody asked what that thing was before he went back to the fishery. The coast is still there. The wind still carries sound to leeward. The knowledge is somewhere else now. If this channel is going to keep documenting what Canadian patrol officers knew about their territories and what it cost the institution when that knowledge left, subscribe. There are more roads, more detachments, more crossings, more calls with 3 pieces of information the dispatch did not contain, and none of it was ever asked to write itself down. Years on one stretch of water gave that captain a working picture of a coastline that no chart carried, no order from Ottawa contained, and no dispatch system since has been designed to hold. And if you have a patrol route, a posting, a winter road, a detachment, put it in the comments. If your family crewed on this coast, name the boat and the port, and tell us what they knew about that water. Next, 4 aircraft, 1937, and the year the RCMP started seeing its own territory from above.